Hi guys, Juan here, welcome to the vlog. I apologize, I am a mess. I just came from outside. I was doing the yard and yeah, I'm all sweaty, gross and nasty, so I apologize. You can see it's like, The reason why I'm doing this is because I just saw something on Facebook that really gave me a cause for pause. And I wanted to share a little bit about, at least my view, on that whole issue. What I saw was this video that talked about white privilege. The speaker was arguing that calling white people out for their white privilege was one of the highest forms of racism there is. I don't think you guys need me to tell you that right now we're dealing with a lot. Racism all of a sudden has taken center stage, and it should, because racism has been something that has been kind of swept under the rug, if you will, and really has not been dealt with. And now it's come to the point where things are just starting to boil over. There's evidence of racism that's being recorded, that's being documented, and it's scary because it's still very much alive. And for the longest time, I think most of us were under the impression that racism was really no longer an issue. Now we're realizing that it really is an issue. White privilege is a thing. And for somebody to say that white privilege or calling people out for white privilege is racist misses a very big point. I'm going to ask a few questions. Bear with me. Question number one. Was there ever a time in our history where white people thought that black people were somehow inferior, were somehow different in such a way where they could not be together with white people, or had to have different schools, different facilities, could not eat at the same restaurants, had to have different seats on the same buses and same location of entertainment, etc.? Was there ever a time in our history like that? Yes, there was. When was this time in our history? If you answered 1960-ish, you're right. I think Jim Crow laws were enforced until 1965. So, 1965. What date are we on? What year are we on today, right? Like what, 2020, right? So that's 1965 to 2020. How many years is that? That's 55 years. 55. So let's say someone was in their 20s in 1965. And it's been 55 years. That will make them what? 75 years old today? Do you know anybody who is 75 years old today? Do you know any white person that's 75 years old today? So, bear with me. In 1965, or 1960s, early 1960s, because these laws were well in effect before 1965, there were white people who felt like black people were so less of a person that they had to be separated from white people. White people in the early 60s, some, because not all white people felt this way, of course, but some white people in the 1960s felt like black people had to have their own schools, had to have their own restaurants, had to have their own water fountains. And even when these black people in the 1960s pulled themselves together and created communities that were vibrant, full of life, and were successful, white people in the 1960s pulled themselves together and harassed people in these communities. You got neighborhoods that were bombed. One neighborhood was bombed as early as 1985. You got mobs in Tulsa, Oklahoma, white mobs that harassed black residents. And the thing about that is that this history is fairly recent. It's not that long ago. It should be fresh in our memories. And so when people say that there is no white privilege, that there is no system in place to oppress black people. They're either very delusional or they're intentionally hiding the fact of history. See, it's not that long ago that blatantly white people discriminated against black people. They refused to give them jobs, high-paying jobs, because they were black. They refused to move them into certain communities because they were black. They refused to allow them in certain places because they were black. They were harassed in their very own community. The black folks were harassed by white folks. All of this happened not that long ago. And so, I guess the other question is, do you think that it is possible that these people who lived in the 1960s, right, could be alive today, could be in places of leadership, could be in places of authority, could be in places that would give them the advantage to make the lives of black people difficult today? Is that possible? And do you think that laws that were created during the 1960s, or institutions that were created during the 1960s, or policies that were created in the 1960s that targeted black people could still be somehow active today? Of course. The fact is that there is a system that has been built, that has been rooted in our current system, in all of our systems, whether it be economical system, social system, you name it. There is an overarching system designed to oppress black people, designed to give white people more opportunities than black people. And there has been studies done on this. There's a study, for example, that shows that people with black sounding names are passed over for job interviews on a higher rate than people with white sounding names. Why is that? And here's another question for you. How many black presidents have we had in our history? One. Do you think that that's because black people have not wanted to be presidents? We live in a society that has a racist system. That's the truth. And the sooner that we can acknowledge that, the sooner we can start rectifying that. Because that's not right. If we call ourselves an advanced society, racism is really, it's ignorant, is beneath anybody who is remotely intelligent. Why would we tolerate such a stain on us? Why would we do that? We should stand together and fight it. And if you're white, you should recognize that there is a system that benefits you. But I know that there are white people who are cognizant of the fact that, yes, there is a system that benefits you. And it's not their fault that that system is in place. They were in there 60 or so years ago creating these systems. And I think it would not be wise, or it would not be right to point our fingers at that person and say it's your fault. But when this white person refuses to at least acknowledge that yes, there is that system in place, and yes, something must be done about it, then they are purposely trying to ignore something that's very real and something that is hurting other people. And that, I think, in my opinion, is the problem, right? I'm not blaming a white person for the white privilege system that's been, unfortunately, alive and well all these years. But I do blame a white person that refuses to acknowledge that and do something about it. And so when I see white people argue that calling someone racist or calling white people out for their use and abuse of white privilege is racist, I feel like that's an argument that misses the point. The point is that the white privilege system is very well and alive today, and it's affecting black people in ways that are very negative and in ways that are now coming to light. And this system has infiltrated everything from our police force to our education, to our politics, to our social norms, heck, even television. And so we have to confront it. We can't mince words. We can't be politically correct. We can't be afraid of offending someone. When you're dealing with a disease, sometimes the cure hurts, but you have to go through it in order to get cured. If you're disinfecting a wound, pouring alcohol on it hurts like crazy. But if you don't do that, that wound can fester. That wound, it can get infected. And if it's not treated, the result, the treatment of that infestation is much worse than the original wound. And so right now, we have to call things for what they are. Some people are going to get offended. Can't help that. But the truth is that there is white privilege in place. We have to call it out, and we have to do something about that. Everybody deserves a chance to be successful, but it's not right when there is a system that says, I'm going to favor this group of people so that they have more chances to be successful as opposed to this group of people. I'm going to make everything harder for this group of people so that they're not as successful. And that's the system that's in place. It may not be as obvious, but it's there. And we have to sit down and be true to ourselves. We have to face the reality head on, and we have to do things to rectify it. But we're not going to do anything until we do acknowledge that it's there. For white folks, I'm sorry. All these white folks that are getting upset at all these protests and all these people getting bent out of shape, that are getting mad at the terminology being used, such as all lives matter and certain words. And look, like I was telling a friend of mine a while ago, when people are grieving, things that normally would not get someone upset do, right? You have a heightened sense of emotion, a heightened sense to triggers, sensitivity to words, sensitivity to actions. And the fact of the matter is that black people are grieving. They've been grieving for a very long time. And now you want them to all of a sudden just play cool or don't use terminology like Black Lives Matter, because the reality is that all lives matter, right? Well, no. I mean, yes, of course all lives matter, but that's the common sense thing to realize. Of course all lives matter. What kind of a person would not think that all lives matter? Yes, all lives matter. But the fact of the matter is that right now, black lives are being targeted, are being oppressed by a system that's in place to specifically negate them opportunities, negate them safety, negate them the ability to move forward in life, in their professions, in whatever. And it is because of that that we have to be very cognizant and very purposeful in calling out the system that's in place and bringing awareness to the fact that black lives are in danger and black lives are being targeted unjustly. I hope that made sense. Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. Have a good day.